We were talking, or I was talking about the relationship of religious-affiliated nonprofits and the government. We hear so much today about the separation of church and state, how that's becoming a problem now. Government making religious organizations do what they feel is morally wrong. Do you run into those issues at Auberle?
Well, you run into those issues. In this area, I think there's a great accommodation between the government and between the organizations.
You're talking about local government.
Right,
okay.
and local and state. And there aren't issues where, you know, people coming into Auberle, we're a Catholic organization, but the Catholic Church does that to really demonstrate that it's carrying its principles into the community and not just talking about them. We have a spirituality program, but kids have to sign up for it, purely voluntary, they and their parents, although we get about 90% of our kids in residential, for example, go into that program, but the government, even if they're there at the request of a court, wouldn't order that, and we wouldn't impose it on anyone, and as long as we do that, it works out very well.
What about this health care bill and the contraceptive issue? Are you involved in that as an organization?
Well, yes, that's an issue with all the Catholic agencies in the country, that the mandate to violate their principles is causing a lot of problems, and there's now, as you know, PJ, a lawsuit that seeks to overturn that. Right, right.
About 40 of them. Well, is that, how much of it is it, I hear a lot of people just, you know, closing their eyes, clenching their teeth, saying that the government is becoming overbearing in this regard. Do you feel that?
Well, in that instance, I think they are. There wasn't any reason to do that. The government had a lot of options to be able to accomplish what it wanted to do without infringing on the religious organizations. They had the ability in the Health Care Act to go a different way, and it was kind of heavy-handed that they chose to do that and pull the religious organizations into that orbit. Normally, the government's always been very careful. It's had a lot of conversations with people to go about its business and to not impose its will on a religious entity.
So you feel there's some way to come up with some sort of compromise so this, you know, that provision of the Health Care Act can go forward? And,
oh, no question about it.
Okay, well, that's good. What about the Salvation Army and your religious nature and your relationship with the government? Do you feel the government is overbearing?
Well,
making you do things that you feel are morally questionable or wrong?
No, and if it ever did, the Army would simply just back away from the funding that we receive. We've been actually able to work hand in hand with the government, but we make no apologies for who we are. We are a Salvation Army, so we emphasize salvation. But we also, they also know that many of the programs that we do meet human needs without discrimination. We do not discriminate when it comes to meeting the needs of the people that come to us. And so the government sees our programs. They are faith-based, but they're effective. As John was saying, we do an effective program. We have effective outcomes. We're meeting needs. And so if there's ever a time where we can't do what the Salvation Army does, we simply step away from it and we'll refuse to take the funding.
What if the government money went away? Would Auberle still exist?
Auberle unquestionably would still exist. It would be significantly impacted in the number of people it could serve. And a lot of work that Auberle does where we get government money, we're doing the government's job. For example, we run emergency shelter. When you watch the 11 o'clock news and you see that the police have come to someone's house and picked up the kids and social services called, Auberle's called 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Those children are frequently with us in our facility. So if the government...
Are you a contractor with the county in that regard?
In that regard, yes, and they don't pay the full cost, but they pay a good part of the cost and in other areas. So as the government stepped away, the second issue the government would have would be, you realize no government locally has its own shelter. So when those children came into the care of the police, what would you do with them? You'd have to start a government facility to do that part of Auberle's work.
And you know, I think for most nonprofits, for all of us, it is the government does have a responsibility to ensure the health and well-being of its citizens. And so it's a public-private partnership, but the government the government has a role. If you look at SNAP benefits, it shouldn't be the role of the food bank to feed people. The government has, we partner in that, but the government has a responsibility to do that.
Okay. Well, a short break. When we come back, we want to learn a little bit more about these organizations, Auberle, the Food Bank, and the Salvation Army, and we will learn more when we come back. Stand by. Don't go away.